Hey everybody, how's it going? Hope you're having a great one. So yesterday I talked about the first day of the convention and looked forward to the second day. So today we're going to do the same. We're going to talk about day 2 and we're going to look forward to the final day of the Ontario NDP convention and what's at stake. So yesterday the biggest news was the leadership review. Every convention has one, whether the election went good or bad, and so the goal here was to ask the delegates, do you think we should have a leadership vote? And 84% of people said no, suggesting that they have great support in Andrea Horwath. There had been some rumors, as there always are, at this point of a leadership tenure, and right before a leadership review, will this be her last election? Will the voters, the delegates reject her? Who will replace her? And on and on and on. But as we see clearly here, there was no appetite for change in the leadership, at least right now. And so as it appears, Andrea Horwath is going to be the NDP leader at the Ontario level in the 2022 election. So no surprise there from my end. Again, I voted against the leadership review. Most of the delegates did, obviously. And again, as I noted yesterday, this was likely the case because, the election went well. She didn't have an heir apparent. There was a sense that, changing leaders just to do that is not necessarily a wise move. You got to have a reason to change leaders. And the opposition right now is doing a good job at situating itself, and that at least has something to do, I would feel, with Andrea Horwath's leadership and the team she's built, both the elected team and the staff team. So no surprise on my end. Other big news, of course, there was party elections. We elected the party vice presidents and the party president and treasurer. No surprises there. The people who were expected to win won. There was a general slate of candidates selected by much of the mainstream elements of the party, and that slate won, I assume, fairly easily. We don't get specific numbers. It's not something that we do at NDP conventions generally. So in that case, we can't be sure, but I'm pretty sure that slate won fairly handily. Some of the big policy decisions, the biggest one in my view, was the moving of the voting age down to 14. The delegates supported that. Often you've seen in recent years people talking about moving the voting age down to 16. That's a pretty common progressive policy platform. Hasn't been implemented yet in Canada or the United States, but it's a common, argument by progressives. One of the arguments being, look, you're old enough to drive, you often have a job, you obviously are in the process of getting educated. Why shouldn't you have the right to vote? Especially because these decisions will be affecting you in some ways more than the older people who, have less years to live with the consequences of the decisions being made right now. But 14 is a bit more of a radical step, but it's one I support because the movers of the motion made a great point. They suggested that, at 14, you can work. At 14, you can join a union. And in our party, at least, in the Ontario NDP, you can be a member of the OND, the Ontario New Democratic Youth, as early as, I think it's 13 or 14. It might be 13, but certainly by 14, you can be a member of OND. You could run for positions in our party. It's not technically impossible that the president of our party be somebody who's 14, 15, 16 if they were able to get the support of the delegates. So if we allow that within our own internal structures, trusting them with the democracy of our party, then certainly we should trust young people more broadly with the democracy of our society, of our province. So I'm happy to see that. I think that's a great move. And as we've seen, young people are politically engaged. Young people maybe don't always vote as much as older folks. They should vote. There's no excuse for that. I'm not going to excuse that. Young people, you gotta vote, because if you don't, we're going to keep getting crappy governments that don't give a damn about anybody under the age of 50, let alone 30, right? Like, just a reality. But young people are politically engaged. They're engaged in fighting climate change. They're engaged in fighting discrimination. They're engaged in fighting all sorts of oppression. And so political parties need to, one, acknowledge their struggles and acknowledge their fight. And the NDP did that yesterday, where they really gave big props to the climate strike leaders who are all, for almost to a point, sub-voting age. But also in recognizing that this policy gives those students, give those young people a way to manifest their politics formally. That their protests have value, but those young people shouldn't just have to protest and sort of beg adults to vote the right way so that they don't have to suffer. They should have their own voice in the formal political system. I support that 100%. And I think the biggest news yesterday, besides the leadership review, was the announcement of the Green New Deal. The Green New Democratic Deal, as Andrea Horwath would call it. Much like Jagmeet Singh's federal version of the Green New Deal for the NDP, this seeks to merge the economic and the environmental, to tear down that wall that's for so long existed, saying that you got to choose between the economy and the environment, or you have to choose between jobs and the environment, or you have to choose between the support of working class people and environmentalists. But the reality is that we don't have to choose. With the Green New Deal that takes care of working class people, with the Green New Deal that works with unions and working class people to build the economy of the future, to decarbonize while lowering income inequality, to decarbonize while engaging in a massive retrofitting program. Andrea Horwath said that if we form government, we will launch the largest retrofitting program in the world. That's what Ontario is pledging to do under an NDP government. That's what we're going to do. We're going to do all of this using the power of the people, using public ownership, using worker ownership, using the strength of unions, using redistributive taxation to decarbonize the economy and to build a just society. And only the NDP is offering such a plan. The Liberals and Conservatives, I don't think they really have a serious environmental plan. The Conservatives especially, but even the Liberals. And the Green Party, when they're not, talking about building, when they're not talking about building pipelines, or maybe not building pipelines, but Elizabeth May now seems to like the oil sands, thinks that the oil sands are good oil because it's Canadian, I guess. Maybe she's pro-oil sands, maybe she's not. Some Greens will tell, I don't know what the Green Party believes even about the environment. But I do know that their plan does nothing for workers and has nothing for Indigenous people. And maybe they've kind of cobbled something together because, they've been criticized heavily by Indigenous people for basically being, excluded from the Green Plan. But the reality is that only the NDP has a plan that will address, reconciliation and income inequality within a framework of a Green New Deal. It's the only party that'll offer that. So if you're a progressive who's concerned about the environment, both in Ontario and federally, I think the NDP has a Green New Deal for you. And I think just to kind of close on yesterday, I think one factor that really needs to be noted is the centrality of Indigenous people on the yesterday. There is a real effort to center the needs and views and desires and concerns and struggles of Indigenous people. Often in Canadian politics, we think of Indigenous issues as clearly a federal jurisdiction, that maybe it's something the federal party should deal with. And, I'm sympathetic to that because, the Indian Act, the official act, is a federal piece of legislation. But as we know, Indigenous issues go beyond people with status. And even people with status, they don't all live in reserves. They live in cities and towns and metropolises and all sorts of communities, most of which are under provincial jurisdiction. People get services in that way. And so we need to realize that the act of reconciliation isn't simply, an act around solving the Indian Act. It's actually a broad cultural and economic and social project that has to include the federal government, of course, but also the provinces and the municipalities. And so the Ontario NDP really centering the fact that it will do all it can, in some cases jurisdiction be damned, to work with and on behalf of Indigenous people, that is an encouraging sign. This is a party that has elected the first, Indigenous MP in Ontario's history, Saul Mamakwa, who gave a powerful speech. We heard from representatives of Grassy Narrows and the Trudeau government's utter failure to help those people, to deny the mercury poisoning that's been affecting people for about 50 years, maybe longer. This is a serious issue, and I'm glad the NDP is basically the only party at the provincial level that's talking about this. So we look forward to today. Today there's a few more things Today there's a few more things in play. There's going to be some more elections. There's going to be some more discussion about policy. But the big thing on the agenda is Jagmeet Singh's speech. You know, the federal leader will often come to provincial conventions and speak, especially, you know, a section as big as Ontario's. Jagmeet Singh is going to be here. It's going to be a bit of a homecoming for him. He was, of course, the former deputy leader of the Ontario NDP, was a, you know, MPP from Brampton East. Now, you know, is a federal MP out in Burnaby, and now leader of the federal party. He's going to speak, and it's not just going to be a standard speech, because as it's been reported by the CBC and other places, Jagmeet Singh is planning to at least release the broad strokes of the NDP's 2019 election platform. And it'll sort of be the first major party to release its kind of broad vision. Some policy pieces have started to come out from other parties. You know, the NDP has already released a couple policy pieces on pharmacare and on a Green New Deal. Now we're going to see something a little bit broader. I don't know if we'll see the full policy book and, you know, all of its footnotes and all of the nitty-gritty. I don't know if we'll see that yet. But I think we'll get a broad strokes that will allow the party to sort of leak out explanations and leak out details and leak out, you know, nuances as we go forward into the summer months. Because the reality is the election isn't that far away. And over the summer, there's going to be a lot of, you know, barbecue tours and campaign stops. And whenever the election starts, likely in the late fall, likely in the late summer, early fall, that's, you know, you need to get those ideas out now. And the NDP, as a third party, doesn't get as much media coverage as the big two. You know, they sometimes need to seize these moments to sort of get the policies out there before the, you know, liberals and conservatives do, to help set the narrative. Don't get poached. Don't get, don't get scooped on your key policies. And this is something Andrea Horwath did. Andrea Horwath came out with some big policies early on in the last election cycle. She announced pharmacare, you know, I think a year out from the election, a good 8 months at least from the election. And then in the weeks before the election, she announced, you know, dental care and so many other key policies. And I think that really set the tone. And it was one of the factors that led to her at least being considered, you know, as a second place choice, in a way that if she would have waited, perhaps, maybe that gets thrown to the side and, you know, the NDP is thrown away as, you know, the sacrifice to the ABC voting mantra that we see so often. So Jagmeet Singh has a great opportunity here to speak to a packed room of supporters and to announce the NDP's 2019 platform and really set the tone, showing that the NDP is going to be offering a progressive vision that won't be matched by the Greens, the Liberals, or the Conservatives. So that's it for me. I'm going to be heading down to the convention again as soon as this video is done. Again, I know these are unedited. These are very quick. I do want to get these out to you, though. Some people have noted to me that, you know, they weren't able to make it to this convention. Maybe they're NDP supporters out west or out east. You know, they can't make it to Ontario. They've appreciated this, so I'm glad to hear that. If you want me to talk about things like this in the future, or if you have any questions or comments about this video right now, leave them down below. I'll be sure to read them and respond if I can. If you want to see more videos like this, and this is your first time tuning in, of course you can subscribe. Doing so helps to spread the message about progressive policies in Canada. And of course, if you click that bell, in addition to subscribing, will mean that you'll get notifications on your phone or on your desktop when my videos come up, which of course will mean you'll get to see every single one. So I'll see you guys tomorrow for a sort of, you know, final look at the convention and maybe my broad views about where we're going next. Thanks, guys. Have a great one.